Good morning, class. Today we're going to be talking about what inclusion is, the 5 co-teaching models, and how to implement a successful co-teaching model in the classroom. So first off, we'll start with inclusion. What is inclusion? Inclusion is defined as the opportunity for students with disabilities to learn with students without disabilities. This typically happens in a general education classroom. This classroom has 2 teachers. The 2 teachers are the general education teacher and the special education teacher. Sometimes the students don't know who the special education teacher is there for. All they know is that they get 2 teachers and 2 different styles of learning. Inclusion can be considered the least restrictive environment for some. If you look at the pyramid of the continuum of services, inclusion would be under general education within the classroom, direct special education services, and other related services. It's what happens right before the students get pulled out for resource. Inclusion can work in any content area class if you use the correct models and plan together. Now that we know what inclusion is, we're going to go over the 5 co-teaching models. The 5 co-teaching models that are used on a regular basis are 1 teach, 1 drift, 1 teach, 1 assist, team teaching, parallel teaching, station teaching, and the last one is alternative teaching. This type of teaching is used less often. The first model of co-teaching we're going to talk about today is 1 teach, 1 drift. In this model, 1 teacher is the lead teacher. They teach the bulk of the content knowledge. Then you have a teacher who drifts around the classroom. This teacher makes sure the students are doing what they're supposed to or are taking notes about how students are doing during the lesson or their behaviors. As you can see in this picture, there's 1 teacher standing there with her arms crossed, just observing, while the other teacher is at the front looking at students and teaching. The general education teacher is usually the lead teacher, with the special education teacher being the drifter or observer. It can sometimes be switched. This is the easiest form of co-teaching. It's the easiest form of co-teaching because 1 teacher does the planning and the teaching, while the other teacher just drifts around and takes notes. This model can be used in any content area and in any setting. The second model of co-teaching we're going to talk about today is 1 teach, 1 assist. This model is where 1 teacher teaches while the other assists the students who are having difficulties. As you see in this picture, 1 teacher is teaching while the other is bent over at a student's desk helping them. This model gives 1 teacher more lead than the other. It also allows the lead teacher to end a lesson earlier if the majority of students are understanding, while the other teacher works with the students that are struggling. The teachers should often switch roles to maintain equal leadership within the classroom. When using this model, teachers need to communicate with each other. This model can be used in any content area and in all settings. Team teaching is the third type of co-teaching model that we've learned about. Team teaching is when both the special education teacher and the general education teacher teach at the same time. This type of teaching requires large amounts of communication and planning. You have to plan down to who says what in which part of the lesson and who will do what activities. This model can be very successful. It just takes a lot of dedication and hard work. This type of model works in any content area and in all settings. Parallel teaching is another co-teaching model. This is when you split the students into 2 groups. The 2 teachers both get a group and they both teach the same content. It is a good idea when doing a parallel lesson to do a team teaching intro to the lesson, then do your separate group lessons, then come back together and do a team wrap-up. That way all the students know they're doing the same thing. To group students, the teachers can group based on the needs of the students or the students' learning styles. Sometimes the special education teacher gets all the students that have IEPs and are considered special education. Other times they like to switch them up and put them in a mixture group. This works in most content areas, but the classroom needs to be set up for parallel teaching. You don't want the groups to be right on top of each other, or else your students may not pay attention to you. You also may be teaching differently, and if you're too close, the students from the other group may pay attention to you more than they pay attention to their other teacher. Station teaching is the last type of co-teaching model that is used regularly. Station teaching is when the two teachers co-plan lessons and the result is 3 to 4 different but related stations. Both teachers teach at a station, and then the other 1 to 2 stations are completed independently. You want the independent stations to be easily accessible and have all the materials needed. That way the students don't have to come over to you and bother you while you're trying to teach a 5 to 10 minute mini lesson. You should start these types of lessons with a group intro and end with a group wrap-up. That way the students know that they're learning the same thing and you get to tie all the stations together in a conversation. The content this co-teaching model usually works for is science, math, and writing. The classroom has to be set up specifically for station teaching. You want to have the desks in groups and all the materials accessible and have all the stations relate to each other. Alternative teaching is another co-teaching model. It's not considered one of the 5 co-teaching models because it's not used very often. This type of teaching requires that both teachers teach at the same time. One teacher gets the group of students that are accelerating and the other teaches the group that needs a little extra help. This is unlike one teach, one assist because you take the students that are having difficulties and break them into a group and move to another area. You want to switch between who teaches the students that need extra help and who teaches the students that are accelerating. This could work for any content in any setting. You just need to find an area in the classroom where you could take 4 or 5 students that are having a hard time and work with them. Now that we've talked about the 5 co-teaching models that are used regularly and the 1 co-teaching model that shouldn't be used as regularly, we're going to talk about how to implement inclusion and co-teaching effectively in your classroom. The first thing you want to do when you get a co-teaching assignment is to share your teaching beliefs. This includes how you believe students learn, the classroom environment and how it should be set up, instructional techniques that you use, and the learning styles that you learn best by. Then you want to talk about classroom discipline policies and procedures. This includes behavioral expectations, how you're going to develop class rules, how you're going to develop non-instructional routines and procedures such as going to the bathroom and going to the office. Then you want to talk about consequences and rewards. And this is how you're going to reward your students or how you're going to dole out consequences. Then you want to talk about collaboration, considering co-teaching is collaboration. So you need to know their feelings on how to collaborate, what their communication style is, and how they feel about equity. Once you've done that, then you need to figure out scheduling. When will you plan lessons? Are you going to plan lessons together all the time, sometimes, or never? Or is one person going to plan the lessons and the other person looks over it and says, yeah, this is okay, I think this should be changed, I'll say this, you say this. In order to plan lessons, you need to figure out which models you'll use and for what contents. Like we saw before, some models are only good for certain things, like station teaching. Station teaching usually works better with science, math, and writing, but if you do one teach, one drift, you could use it in any setting, any content area. The other thing is, you need to figure out how you're going to set your classroom up. Are you going to use a majority of the station teaching model so your kids are always in stations, or are you going to use more group lesson type models? When you're monitoring the effectiveness of these models, you can administer exams like you would at the end of any unit, or you could do a one teach, one observe. This way, one teacher is teaching a wrap-up lesson and the other is going around and making sure the students are understanding it, and they're just kind of stepping back and observing to see if the students have gotten the concepts taught. Other things to consider when implementing inclusion and co-teaching are the students and the way they learn, as well as the other teacher in general. Some teachers get put into co-teaching situations that they don't want to be in. They would rather have the special education teacher either work only with their students or stand in the back of the room and only be there for discipline. If you have a teacher that doesn't want to work with you, you may want to sit down and have a conversation with them to work something out, because your students are the most important learners.